to pose a few questions for us today, such as what does it mean to connect to the world via sound? How do we use technology to create art with sound? How can we use sound to tell stories, create immersive environments, and inspire audiences? And these are really fundamental questions, both to digital culture in terms of how we use technology to engage community and tell broader stories, but also in terms of all of the sound work that we do here. Dr. Lillios is here as an artist in residence, as a composer in residence, working in our immersive 3D sound dome and producing along with several other commissions from this semester. So put that in your calendars, please. She's also one of America's most highly acclaimed electroacoustic and acousmatic composers. MIT Press's Computer Music Journal, which is the premier journal in this area, spoke of her as a contemporary master of the medium. So we're really very thrilled that she's here. She works in everything from acousmatic, ambisonic, live electronics, electroacoustic music. So basically anything that's in that space of sound and its creative exploration. She's been awarded many international awards and national commissions and so on from organizations such as the Johnston Foundation, the Fromm Foundation, the Barlow Endowed Commission, and the Fulbright Scholarship. I have a lot more here, but I'm not going to read it all. You can see that she has many accolades and is an extremely accomplished composer. She also is the Director of Composition Activities for the Splice Ensemble, which runs a kind of festival and workshop every year and has become regarded as an important place for contemporary music development and discourse in the US. Her residency here with us and her talk today is supported by the Herberger Research Incentive Grant and the Schools of Arts, Media Engineering, and Music, Dance, and Theatre. And so without any further delay, will you please welcome Dr. Elainie Lillios.
Thank you very much, Professor Payne, and thank you to the tech team that got everything running. And welcome to all of you who are here both in person and virtually. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here to speak with you today about the things that excite me most, which are creativity and working with sound, right? And how we can express ourselves creatively through sound and through sound over time to reach our audiences and to hopefully say something meaningful that people can go away from a concert or from a sound experience, whether it is a concert or an installation or some sort of video art project, and that they can feel that somehow they are changed because of that experience. So I want to share a little bit of my journey with you today and talk a little bit about my life in sound. And I realize that maybe not all of you are composers, maybe not all of you are musicians. And one of the things that I have found as I have been teaching and as I have been engaging with the arts over these last many years is that the arts share a lot of commonalities. And so even if you are not a composer, perhaps you are not even a performer, maybe you are a visual artist, a digital artist, a communications artist, I think that there are a lot of things that we share in common as far as how we think about creativity, how we engage with our materials, and how we put things together in ways that are both present some sort of cohesive, inviting piece of art that we share with our communities. So I have come from Bowling Green State University, and one of the things I want to talk about first, if I can now get my presentation running, is this idea of listening. The author, Barry Lopez, gave a lecture at Bowling Green State University in 2012, and I attended. He writes some amazing stuff. If you have a chance to engage with his written work, I encourage you to do so. He was talking from an author's perspective about what makes people engage with the written word or not, right? What makes you pick up a book and then stay up all night long to read that book because it's so engaging, you can't put it down, versus a book that you might pick up, read 2 or 3 pages and say, man, I just can't get into this book, right? We can say that about many things. We can say that about television. We can say it about the movies, right? We can say that about many things in this life. But Barry Lopez was talking from a writer's perspective, right? And what he said was that a book needs to make space for the reader. And I found that to be a very interesting statement. And I thought, what happens when I think about that from the standpoint of a composer, somebody who creates music that people listen to? And I came up with a revised statement, right? Which is that a piece of music must make room for the listener. So Barry Lopez, when he's writing his works, he wants to make room for the reader so that the reader can engage with what he is writing and feel like they are somehow part of that story, part of that narrative. And for me, I want to make room for my listener so that my listener can feel that somehow they are able to engage, bring some part of themselves into that listening process. And so when I think about creating space for the listener, that takes me to the most important thing that I do in my career as a musician, as a creative individual, and I think also as a human engaged in this world, and that is listening. And listening in a very attentive way, in a very active way, to all sound that surrounds us at all time. I had the good fortune to study deep listening practice with Pauline Oliveros, composer and electronic music pioneer. And I learned quite a good deal about listening. Pauline says that you need to listen to everything there is to listen to at every moment. And Pauline talked about this idea of global listening and focal listening. And she developed a practice called deep listening, in which we engage in a whole body listening activity. So we don't just listen with our ears, we listen with our entire person. And as a composer and creative sound artist, listening with my whole body has become part not just of my daily existence, but also is very closely tied with my compositional practice. As a matter of fact, it's the #1 most important thing that I do. It's not coming up with an idea for a new piece. It's not sitting at my computer for hours on end. It's actually listening and paying attention and attending to listening actively and purposely at all times. And, you know, it's a practice, everybody. I'm not always so great at it, right? Like sometimes I remind myself, hey, you're not listening. And so reminding ourselves of the necessity, the importance, the significance of listening in whatever artwork we engage in, I think is something that is quite vital to us as artists. So that brings me to a blank slide. Where I want to talk a little bit about compositional elements that I think about when I am working to create a piece of music. So when we think about this listening space, right? How do we engage then from a musical or artistic standpoint, right? With this listening space to think about the difference between sound and silence, which for visual arts could be the difference between positive and negative space, right? We think about that in the sonic arts. We think about it in the visual arts. How do we deal with time? How can we deal with time in music? How do we deal with time in the visual arts with video art? How do we deal with time even in the visual arts in still art? The idea of frequency space, right? The idea of timbre, the quality or the sound of a sound, density over time, how much material is there? What is it doing over time? How thick is it? Dense, thin, sparse. Then the idea of a performance. What happens when I take this piece of music out into the world and I have it performed in an art gallery, in a coffee shop, in a concert hall, indoors, outdoors? What does that mean? And how do I need to adjust the work to accommodate those types of spaces? Then to also think about this idea of motion and stasis. How is my music moving through time? What is the energy? What is the energy trajectory of that piece? It's moving rapidly, or it's not moving, or doesn't seem to be moving at all. And then the idea, of course, of a concept. What is my piece about? And in music, we think about this idea of absolute music versus or absolute music or programmatic music, right? Music that tells a story, programmatic music, or absolute music, which is just music for music's sake. We can choose either one. There is no right or wrong, right? My music tends to have some sort of narrative. Sometimes it's a little bit of an abstract narrative, but everyone can simply choose one of those for themselves and then make whatever meaningful statement they wish, right? So we come up with those. And I think about those things from a compositional standpoint, the compositional space, but then also the listening space, because through the creative process, we don't stop listening, because listening is part of that critical assessment. Listening is part of the thing that makes me say, you know, I like that sound, but it's just not working. Or I like that sound, and I think I just want to listen to it over and over and over and over again because I love it so much, right? And then John T. Harrison, who I studied with at the University of Birmingham, says to me, Elainie, I know you are in love with that sound, but maybe your audience doesn't really want to hear it that much, right? So we have to kind of put things into perspective, but everything surrounds this idea of listening, both at the macro level, right, at the big picture, and in the micro level, from moment to moment, as that piece of music or that piece of art unfolds. So I spent a lot of time, and still do, engaged in what I like to call materials-based composition. I record sounds in the environment. I also create synthetic sounds, and I combine them in various ways to make music. And so part of the listening process for me is thinking about what types of sounds, or listening for sounds in the environment. I lived in a house once that had a really wonderful dishwasher door that was really creaky. And so we can find sounds around us every day that we can use for pieces of music. So I'd like to share a little piece with you now. This is a piece called, well, Last Night I Dreamed That My Whole House Was Clean. So apparently, I also do not really deal very much as a creative person in any kind of reality, right? So music allows us to engage in that fantastical part of us, in that dream kind of part of us. So here is Last Night I Dreamed That My Whole House Was Clean. It's just 1 minute, very short. So there's a little ditty for you to introduce you to some of the kinds of ways that I think about sound creatively. Recording sounds in the environment, processing them in different ways, and then putting them together to create sort of a little pseudo narrative. So a lot of times I'm in places and people say to me, well, you know, how do you come up with these ideas, and how do you create sounds? And if I can get this to go forward there, we can talk about this idea of discovering sounds. And I mentioned that I record sounds in the environment. Sometimes I record them in a purposeful way. I create little recording sessions where I record different types of gadgets, things that I find, etc. And then other times I record environmental sounds. I will go to a location and simply record the soundscape. So there are many ways that we can capture the world around us in sound. And one of the things I do when I'm recording sounds is I may come up with some sort of crazy kind of thing. And so I may have a sound that perhaps sounds like this. Forgive me that this is no longer embedded in the presentation. Those of you who are on Zoom don't see this window, but those of you who are in person see this extra window that really should not be there. I apologize. So here's one example. That's an original sound. That is a sound that I recorded. I talked to some students earlier today and I asked them what that sound was. Unfortunately, we don't have time for me to ask you that this afternoon, but I will tell you what that sound is. That sound is a cookie sheet with a credit card that is being rubbed horizontally, well, perpendicularly against that cookie sheet, pressed down very hard and straight. So you say like, well, who comes up with this idea to take a cookie sheet out of the kitchen and grab a credit card and start scraping on that cookie sheet? Well, I do. Okay, so there, so now you know what I do on the weekends. So I recorded this sound. And then what I do is I start processing the sound in different ways using different types of signal processing algorithms. And here is one, the same sound that has reverb added to it. Not a whole lot different than the original, right? It bears a very strong resemblance to the original. So when I'm processing sounds, I think about them in terms of creating families. I'm creating families of sound. My original sound is the parent sound. And then every time I process that sound in different ways, I'm creating little children of that original sound. And then sometimes I create children of the children and children of the children. And then sometimes there is the crazy uncle. The sound that is somehow related to the original, but just doesn't seem anything like the rest of the family. So when we think about this idea of creating material, we could do this with acoustic composing as well. We can do this with visual arts as well. I have my original element, my original object, whatever that is, and I'm going to make a number of different I'm going to develop that object, right? I'm going to make a number of different versions of that original. And then more and more and more, right? And some of them we're going to keep, and some of them we're going to throw disregard, and some of them are going to, say, oh, this is the most amazing thing I ever made, but it took me like 5 children to get there, right? So here is another one. This one has reverb and delay. So going a little bit farther afield, still quite recognizable, the original, but not quite the same, right? Let's listen to another version. So growing a little bit farther away from that original, still recognizable. Let's do two more. There's this. Everything made from the same original cookie sheet. And then here's the crazy uncle. Oh, that's not the crazy uncle yet. Oh. The crazy uncle didn't make it to the folder, I'm afraid. So that's what we're stuck with, are those. So let me make sure that it's not hiding somewhere. Yes, no, it's not. You'll have to contact me for the crazy uncle sound. But so this gives you an idea of kind of how we can take an original recorded sound and process it in various ways to make materials that then end up in a composition. One of the things that I like to play with as a composer is the idea of reality. What is real? What is not real? What is artificial? Am I awake? Am I dreaming? And where does reality lie? And where does reality lie in the scope of what I'm listening to? I would like to play a movement of a piece of mine from 2002 called Backroads. This is movement 2 called Tree Tunnel. It's a fixed media piece. So the questions I ask with this piece is, are you inside the car? Are you outside of the car, watching the car go by? Are you inside the car and are you paying attention to your driving, or are you inside the car and daydreaming? Are the sounds that you're listening to really real? Like, is their origin truly that sound or not? So the whole, is it live or is it Memorex? So here is Tree Tunnel. It starts out a little, oops, sorry, everybody, I've got to trigger it from here. It starts out a little softly. It's not starting out at all. I had been happily composing fixed media music, which is what I kind of call it now, for a number of years, living in my little sound world. And I had the good fortune to have my music played at conferences and festivals where there are performers who perform other people's music. And performers started coming up to me saying, "Oh, I love your fixed media music. Could you write me a piece?" And I had a little bit of a crisis because I couldn't figure out, a flute is not a car, and a flute is not it's not my little hand with the credit card, right? What do I do? I know what to do with a cookie sheet and a credit card. I don't know, what am I going to do with a flute, right? So I embarked on sort of a return to acoustic writing, but it was informed then by all of the electroacoustic composing I had done. And so my compositional process changed quite a bit. And I started thinking about writing for instruments in the same way that I generate electroacoustic material, where I have my original sound and I make the children. And so I started writing music for instruments, and primarily instruments with live electronics. And I've been very fortunate to have a number of really great collaborators, but I found that I needed some sort of extra musical motivation to write for instruments. With electroacoustic music, fixed media music, I used the sounds. The sounds were my inspiration, right? Whatever that little babbling brook, or those pots and pans, or the swishy kind of beans in a pot, whatever I was doing. But I needed something to engage with acoustic instruments again. And I found that inspiration in a poet named Wally Swiss, with whom I have had a wonderful many year relationship with collaboration. He has generously allowed me to use many of his haiku and longer form poems as inspiration for my instrument and live electronics pieces. I'm not sure we have time for me to play that, but I want to talk just a little bit about a piece of mine from 2010 called Among Fireflies. It is based on a haiku by Wally: "Dense with fireflies, the field flickers through the fog." And what I tried to do in this piece, and if you are interested in it, you can find many videos of this piece on YouTube, and I invite you to listen to any of the great flutists who have played this piece. But what I tried to do in this piece was create an environment where where we are again questioning or asking, who is the firefly? Is the flutist a firefly? Is the flutist a human surrounded by fireflies? And what is the process of this piece? So at the beginning, it is very frenetic, and the performer is playing a lot of explosive, extended techniques through their flute to imitate this idea of the freneticism of masses of fireflies, that this person, either the flutist is a firefly along with all the other ones, or a person surrounded by fireflies. And as the piece progresses, we distance, the performer becomes distanced from those fireflies, so that by the end, right, the field flickers through the fog. The performer then is looking, we as listeners are observing or looking at the fireflies who have remained where they were through kind of a vast expanse of the fog. And what does that mean sonically, right? So what is that sound journey like if we think about dense with fireflies, the field flickers through the fog, right? And so my piece for alto flute and live electronics takes us through that sound journey. And one of the reasons I've enjoyed working with Wally's materials and with Wally for all of these years is that his music, his poetry, when I read it, makes me think of musical ideas. It inspires me to think, makes me think about sounds. And so I keep returning to him and to his work over and over again for different pieces that I have composed. This is the first page of the score, so you can see a little bit how it's notated, not traditionally at all, right? So at any rate, I will mention very briefly that I also have some very long-term collaborators with whom I work. This is my friend and colleague, Scott Deal, who is a percussionist composer who teaches at IUPUI in Indianapolis, Indiana. Scott and I have been working together for a number of years. We developed a mutual admiration club. I had seen him perform at many different conferences and festivals. He had heard my music at conferences and festivals, and we came together at an international computer music conference, and he said, well, I'd really like to work with you. And I said, well, I'd really like to work with you too. And now we have done quite a number of projects together. And one of the beauties of working with a performer in this kind of very personal way is that you can invite them into the process. So I invited Scott into the process, and our first piece that we collaborated on, he said, I want you to write a piece for this big, huge setup that I have in my basement. This is his basement, right? I want you to write me a piece for this setup. I said, okay. He said, and I want a piece that's going to take people to the edge, right? And I said, okay. So I wrote a piece for him again using Wally Swiss poetry, a poem by the name of The Rush of the Brook Stills the Mind, which is a really beautiful poem about a journey along a waterfall that is also a journey of the self. And I wrote a piece for Scott that takes him to the edge. It's a very, very virtuosic piece. It's a very boisterous piece. I'm sorry that we don't have time to listen to it today. Our technical difficulties sort of curtailed things a little bit, but again, I invite you to go to YouTube, where you can find a couple of performances of this piece on YouTube. I think you can also find it on my SoundCloud channel. If you go to SoundCloud and you look up my name, you will find this piece. And so I will close from here in case anyone has questions, either online or in person. Here is a live concert setup for The Rush of the Brook Stills the Mind, so that you can kind of see the setup. It's very, very large. And it was so large that when we went to do our second collaboration, right, Scott said, this time I want something simple. I said, okay, well, what do you want? He said, how about vibraphone? That's a lot easier to travel around with. So my second piece for Scott is a vibraphone piece. And so we went from humongous that took 3 suitcases to travel. Thankfully, he had some sort of platinum crazy ultimate status that he was able to take all of these big suitcases places when we went. From this huge setup to vibraphone, and we still are working together, and it's been a really wonderful and beneficial, very uplifting relationship. Some sketches, a little bit of some of the piece, so you can kind of see what the notation turned out to be. Very boisterous, lots of stuff going on, live electronics, fixed media, it's the whole 9 yards. And again, my apologies that we are not able to watch it and listen to it together, but I do invite you again to check it out if you desire. And with that, that's sort of an abbreviated version of my sound journey. The journey continues. I'm so excited about working in the Dome, which is a whole nother beautiful sound experience, where, you know, you sit inside that dome and you are just immersed in sound coming from all around you. And it's not just sound that comes from what you think is the dome. It's sound beyond the dome, right? We can pull sound outside of the structure of the dome. And so it really makes the whole idea of space, of being in a confined space, it makes that disappear. The walls disappear, and you become immersed in just sort of this world of sound that is surrounding you on all sides, above and below. And so it's really a big treat to be working in this space. And those of you who are here at ASU, I hope that you will have an opportunity to listen to music in that space, maybe work in that space. And if you do, I encourage you to take advantage of it, because it's a very rare thing to have such an amazing instrument at your disposal. And I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to use it and enjoy it. So thank you all for attending today, and I'm happy to take your questions. Yes, please.
Without laughs. Oh, yeah. Oh, cool.
I was just wondering, for that last piece that you discussed, was it only like the percussion instruments shown, or not the second piece, but the one that was with the crazy setup of all the drums? Did you use just percussion instruments in that, or did you record nature sounds like the previous projects of yours?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking. That piece uses percussion sounds because they are processed. The percussionist is being processed live. So when the percussionist is playing, the computer is giving back, it's listening to what he's playing, or the percussionist, whoever the percussionist is, they are playing. And then it's creating electronics based on that. But I also do have some sound files that appear in that piece in various places. Same is true for the flute piece. The flute piece is also live electronics, where the flutist is being processed live, but I have some environmental sounds that come in, crickets, to set the stage, to set the scene for what's happening. So Rush of the Brook stills the mind. There are water sounds, and there are other types of sounds that help create that kind of environment that surrounds the performer and the audience. Thank you for asking. Yes, please. Absolutely.
I was just also wondering if you had any like dream projects that you wanted to work on, or like new mediums you wanted to explore within sound.
Thank you for asking. I'm living my dream project right now, working in the dome. Celia and Professor Payne got the spatialization working, and I was here last night moving sound around the space. That is an absolute dream project. Another project that I've engaged in recently, thanks to the pandemic, is moving back a little bit to live performance. And so I have a trio with my percussion colleague, Scott Deal, and a gentleman named Chris Biggs, who teaches at Western Michigan University. We have an improv trio, and we meet telematically. We meet online, and we've done a number of improv projects together that involve Scott playing percussion and Chris and I processing Scott over the internet, right, with our electronics, live electronics rigs. And then we have some videos that go along with them. And now I've started, actually, Chris and I now are also performing. So all three of us are performing and processing each other. And it's just a ton of fun. So those are kind of my dream projects, but that are actually happening. I'm very fortunate that way.
Very cool. Do you have any place where I could listen to the trio pieces?
Yes, if you go to YouTube, you should be able to go to YouTube and either type my name and ESC. ESC is the name of our trio. It's the Escape Trio, the Escape Key Trio, but it's Elainie, Scott, and Chris. So we were able to kind of do a nice little acronym. And if you cannot find the videos, just send me an email. You can find me online. Send me an email and I will send you the links to the videos. Yeah, thank you for your interest.
Elainie, perhaps I could ask you a question.
Please.
So you are here working in the dome, and clearly one of the things that you've also mentioned is this sense of spatiality. And actually, in a beautiful slide that you had earlier on about all of these kind of qualities or points of investigation, space was kind of there also. Could you talk a little bit, because there's obviously different kinds of space that you're talking about. One is perhaps a sensation of physical space and scale, and earlier you talked about making space for the listener, which is obviously a different kind of space. And then perhaps between within the compositional materials themselves, there's a notion of space.
Mhm.
Could you kind of unpack those a little bit? I know we don't have very long, but
Yes.
yeah.
Sure. Thank you. That's a really wonderful question. I think when I think about the idea of space, right? Of course, as you mentioned, there are many different ways that we can think about, acknowledge, address, and manage space. There is, in no particular order, the physical space in which a piece is being presented, whether it's a concert hall or a church or a small cafe or wherever, right? So there is the physical location in which the music is being heard. We cannot control that space. That space is the space we've been given, and we need to manage it to the best of our ability. There is the artificial space that we can create in the compositional process, and we can do that with reverberation, impulse response reverberation. We can try to make sounds theme or appear to be in a certain kind of space. There is also the idea of spatialization, where I have a multi-speaker sound system and I can perform and make the sound seem that it's moving away or moving around the audience. Of course, the dome is a very good example of that, where I can actually create a very spatially immersive environment. There is the space of each sound, so we can think about, this is where things get really philosophical and a little bit strange, perhaps. But when I'm making sounds, I think about the personality of that sound, to for lack of a better word. I mean, all of my sounds have their own kind of personality, and based on that personality, like they're a boisterous sound, or they're a super laid back, chill like sound, or they're an inquisitive sound, or they are an instigator type sound, right? So every sound has its own personality, and that's how I figure out how to put them together. Well, what does that have to do with space? Each of those sound types, or each of the sound personalities, has its own spatial demand based on their personality, right? A super chill sound, it doesn't mind where you put it because it's happy to do whatever, because it's a super chill sound. But a very demanding sound, it wants to be in the front, it wants to be in the center, it wants to be right in there, right? So thinking about it from that standpoint as well. There is also kind of the mental space for composing, but for me, more importantly, is kind of the emotional space of composing. I have a difficult time composing when I have a lot of demands, I'm in a hurry, I have a lot of different responsibilities, you know. The idea of making space in yourself, for yourself, to do the creative work, I think maybe is more important than all of those other types of spaces, right? Because you can be in the greatest space, the most perfect space, but if you're not in the most perfect space, you cannot, I think, really take the best advantage of that. So it's all about space, but it's also all about listening, right? Because we have to listen to ourselves, and we listen for that space. We listen to our sounds. We listen for what space they want to occupy. And now I should listen to myself and stop talking. There we go. Yeah.
Thanks so much. We have another question from YouTube, actually.
Great.
How do you deal with latency over the internet, or due to the nature of the music, is it not an issue? So I think that's in response to your trio.
Oh, to the trio.
Your online trio.
Yes, the online trio. Well, we try to keep the latency as low as we can, but at the end of the day, you have to embrace it. It's yet another one of those spaces, right? It's a space that you really can't do much about. We connect with Ethernet so that we are using the fastest networks that we have at our disposal at any given time. We are using a tool, for those of you who might be interested in this, called Sonobus. So we are using Sonobus to connect with each other. My colleague Chris is using Ableton Live. I'm using Max. Scott Deal, the percussionist, uses Max. So we are connecting to each other then that way. And so the latency, you know, there are times when we decided, okay, it's time to record our improv and we're going to put it together and, you know, put a video on YouTube. Great. Okay, let's do it. And we get halfway through and somebody's network starts to glitch. And then we have to say, oh, that was a busted take. We need to start over again. So I can't, I'm sorry, YouTube folks, I cannot answer that question. We just deal with it. And you realize that you cannot play exactly in time with each other. And you embrace that as part of the beauty of that process, rather than think of it as a limitation. That's all I could say about that. Thank you.
What is your live setup?
My live setup. Oh, my live setup is sad. I have the computer part of my live setup is great. I have a signal processing toolbox that I built using Max, Cycling 74's Max software, and it has inside of it a whole array of signal processing algorithms that I can route an incoming sound to in any combination. So I have pre-fader sends on all of my effects. So I can come in, go to a delay, send that delay to a harmonizer, send the harmonizer to a granulator, send the granulator to a reverb, et cetera, et cetera. So that part of my setup is really quite robust. But the live performance side of things, I am using a Behringer, old equipment. I am using a little Behringer BCF 2000. Faders and buttons to, you know, control this stuff and turn things on and off. And then Chris gave me this old Akai, I don't even know what it is. It's another little small box with some faders on it so that I can again control like the gains in Max. So I'm just using these control surfaces to control gains in Max. And Dr. Bolaños today actually just loaned me, for working in the dome, this nice little Korg nano control, right? So now I'm going to hook it up in the dome. This is sort of a tangent, but you know, I'm not working. Chris Biggs at Western Michigan, my ESC colleague, he's got all the gadgets. And when you're gonna, if you look at the videos, you see his setup, and he's surrounded by all this super cool stuff and all the blinking lights. And here's me, laptop on the side, and my little boxes with the faders. So I'm afraid it's not very overwhelmingly great, but you know what? It does what I need it to do. But now we've got this for working here, and I might buy myself one of these too. I'm more interested in faders, because I'm working mostly with live processing. And so I want to be able to fade things, fade effects in and out, rather than triggering like sampling or looping, which I don't do so much. Thank you for asking.
Cool. Thank you very much. So thank you to everybody online. Thank you for the questions. And of course, thank you to Elainie Lillios for being here today and giving us such a fantastic talk. I'm sorry that our technical things shrunk down our listening, because of course, as she says, the most important thing we can do is to listen. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.